Hi, welcome to this workshop. My name is Millie and I'm a calligrapher and designer, and today I'm going to be taking you through how to create faux calligraphy and how to make your study notes that little bit more special. Before we dive into what faux calligraphy is and how we can apply these to study notes, I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit further. So I run a business called Blink Lettering. I sell prints and greetings cards, and I also teach calligraphy. I've taught calligraphy online and in person to over 3,000 students, and I'm so excited today that Silvine have asked me to teach you some calligraphy skills. So in this video, we're going to go through what faux calligraphy is, the best tools to use for faux calligraphy. We'll go through the basics of how to do faux calligraphy and how you can apply these to your study notes and how it can actually help with studying. And then I'll also go through a worksheet that I've created for you that you can download and print at home. The download link for this will be in the description below. And it's just a little cheat sheet to help remind you everything that I'm covering in today's workshop. So let's get started and dive right in. For this workshop, I'm going to mainly be using this Silvine Luxe pad. It's an A4 plus notepad which has dotted pages. The paper's also super smooth as well, which really helps with writing. The reason I've chosen to use this notepad is because of the dotted grid. The dotted grid is great for helping you create your calligraphy strokes, but also for general study notes as well. It gives you a grid to draw graphs and also gives you a guide to make sure that your writing is straight and neat. I also have these revision cards, and just like the notepad, these are also dotted. So again, really good for study notes and faux calligraphy. Now, faux calligraphy doesn't require any fancy tools or pens. You can just use normal pens that you have at home. You can even use a pencil to do faux calligraphy. In this video, I'm going to be using the Stabilo Pen 68 pens, which just have a bullet point tip. But as I said, you can pretty much use any pen that you have at home. It doesn't need to have any sort of flexible nib or brush tip because we are going to be adding the thick and thin lines that you see in calligraphy by drawing them in. We'll get more into that later. Okay, so let's start with what actually is faux calligraphy. Now, you may have seen beautiful writing over on Instagram or on YouTube or even Pinterest where there is handwriting that has thick and thin lines. Now, this isn't actually handwriting, this is something called calligraphy, and it is a creative art that involves using some sort of tool that has a flexible nib. I'm just going to show you what calligraphy is first, and I'm using the Pen 68 brush pen. So this is similar to the other pens that I have here, but it does have a brush tip, and this enables me to create calligraphy. So if I just write the word study, you can see that I'm creating thick and thin lines. I'm also lifting my pen off the paper. Even though it is connected, we are lifting our pen off the paper to create different strokes and therefore create our letters. This is what calligraphy is. Now, faux calligraphy is where we try and recreate this style with the thick and thin lines, but only using a bullet tip. So if I go in and write the word study again, just like I've done there, I'm using a bullet tip, which is the Pen 68 without the flexible nib. So you can see I'm creating very similar shapes to the word above, but because I'm using a bullet tip, the line stays the same thickness all the way through. So faux calligraphy is recreating these thick lines by drawing them in. So if I go back in and start copying what I've done up here, we've got a thick line here. We've got a thick line on this T. and then on the U, on this part of the D and also this part, and then our Y. So faux calligraphy is essentially fake calligraphy. So it's creating a calligraphy style of writing, but using bullet tip rather than a flexible nib. As I've mentioned already, you can even do this using a pencil. So if I were to go in with the word study again, notice that I'm taking my pen or pencil off the paper every time I do a stroke, and we'll go more into that further on in the workshop. So now I can take my pencil and I can add in these thick lines. For this, I'm not actually filling in the lines, but it still creates the same effect. So you can create beautiful writing like this, but with really simple tools that you have lying around at home. Okay, now you have a basic understanding of what faux calligraphy is. We're going to dive into how to actually create faux calligraphy. Before I go through the basic calligraphy strokes that will help you create letters, I'm just going to clear up a few things that people get a little bit confused about when doing faux calligraphy. So when I was going through what faux calligraphy is, you will have noticed that I was lifting my pen off the paper after each stroke. So I'm lifting my pen off the paper and repositioning myself. So although faux calligraphy or calligraphy looks joined up, we're actually lifting our pen off the paper and using a series of strokes. This enables us to create really consistent letters that look beautiful. Now, even if you have messy handwriting, and let me tell you, I've got messy handwriting. Even if you have messy handwriting, you can still do faux calligraphy. So now if I write this word, but using my normal handwriting, so that's my normal handwriting. You can see some letters are joined up, some letters aren't. It's also a lot smaller than the letters over here, although you can do faux calligraphy smaller than this as well. So one thing to bear in mind with faux calligraphy is it's not just about adding thick lines to your own handwriting, it's about creating a calligraphic style. It's also different to cursive writing. So if I were to write the word study in cursive writing, so you can see that although all the letters are joined up, it doesn't look as neat as these letters up here, and also we don't have as much space to add in our thick and thin lines. If I start trying to add these in, can you see it's starting to look a little bit messy? So how do we go from messy handwriting like this or cursive writing like this to beautiful letters like this? So in calligraphy, there's something called calligraphy drills or strokes. And we're going to apply them to faux calligraphy, and this will help create really neat writing, like the word we have here. So if you grab a pen and paper first, I'm going to take you through how to do those strokes and also where to add in the thick lines. And then I'll show you how to bring these strokes together to create lowercase letters. So we have our entrance stroke. We then have a downstroke. I normally call this a full pressure stroke when it's in calligraphy, but because we don't need to change the pressure of our pen, it's just a downstroke. We then have our overturn, our underturn, and then a combination of the two, which is a compound curve. And then we have an ascending stem loop, a descending stem loop, and an oval. So I know these don't look like much right now, But when you start putting them together, you can start creating letters. So let me just show you an example of how you can put these strokes together to create a letter, and then we'll look at where we need to start adding these thick strokes. So if, for example, I take this stroke here and this stroke here, I've got my downward stroke, and then I create my compound curve, and we've created the letter N. Or for example, we take this stroke and this stroke. We start with the oval shape, and then we do our ascending stem loop, and we have our letter D. So can you see that although these strokes look a little bit weird, they enable you to create really consistent, neat letters, which is essentially how calligraphy is formed. So let's see how we make it more like calligraphy by adding on thick lines. So I'm just going to do these lines again. And then we've got our underturn, our compound curve, our ascending stem loop, our descending stem loop. And notice that this sits on the same line as all the other strokes and then goes above them, and then this goes below. So these are for like your H, B, D, and then this is more for your Y and your G. And then we've got our oval. So when it comes to adding thick and thin strokes in calligraphy and faux calligraphy, the rule we need to follow is thick strokes are down and thin strokes are up. So wherever your pen is going down, that needs to be a thicker stroke. So if we just go back over these strokes that we've just done and just trace the direction that we went in. So this one we went in an upward direction. This one we went down. This one we started upward and then we went down. This one started downward and went up. This one went over and then back up again. And this one started going up and then going down. This one started down and then going up. And then this one we start over here and go in an anti-clockwise direction. So we're going down on this side and up on this side. So now we've got those directions in, let's add in our thick and thin lines. So we can see this is up, and the rule is that if it's up, it's thin. So we're not adding any thickness onto that line. This one, however, is down. So we do want to make this thicker. And I'm just making it roughly double the size. Next, we have this stroke, which starts going up and then goes down. So it needs to go thin first and then thick down. And we want to try and make this a nice fluid motion. We don't want it to be too squared off. Then this one starts going down first, so we want that nice and thick, and then it goes up. Again, we want to curve this round so it's a nice fluid motion. Now we're starting to get a little bit more complicated, so we're going up first and then down, which is thick, and then we're going back up again. This one we start going up and then it goes down, so we want this stroke here to be the thick stroke. And then for this one, because we start going down first, we want this part to be thick, and then where it starts going back up, that is thin. And then for this oval, we start on this side and move around in an anti-clockwise direction, so this side of the oval needs to be thick. So all you really need to remember when it comes to adding thick lines to your faux calligraphy is that thick is down and thin is up. So make sure you take a note of that. And if you're having any troubles remembering which way is down, which way is up, just go back over your letters and trace them. You don't have to put your pen on the paper, and then that will help remind you where you need to add the thick and thin lines. Okay, now I've taken you through the basic calligraphy strokes and how to add thick lines. I'm going to show you how to do the whole lowercase alphabet, putting these strokes together. Now for this exercise, I'm going to use 2 different colour pens, and every time I need to lift my pen off the paper, which is after doing one of these strokes, I'm going to change the colour. This is a really good way of getting into the practice of lifting your pen off the paper and not getting in the temptation to just write normally. So let's start with the letter A. And this starts off with an oval over here. So we're just going to start in the middle, go anti-clockwise and pull through. And then in terms of where the thick and thin line goes, we know that we're going up here and then down. So this is where we add our thick line. I'm then going to do the second stroke, and for that I'm changing the pen colour. And for this we're using our underturn, which is this stroke here. So I'm just going to come next to that stroke, pull through and up. I'm not going to bring it all the way to the top for this specific stroke, just to make sure it still looks like an A. We're then going to add a thick line. So we start going down first. So this is where the thick line is. Okay, let's move on to our letter B. So we're starting with this stroke here, which is our ascending stem loop. So we're going to start it at the same level as the top of our A. We're going to pull it round and then come down. And we had our thick line downward here. So we are adding that in. And then for our B, we're actually going to do a slightly different shape. So these are the standard strokes in calligraphy, and a lot of them will come together to create letters. However, there are certain strokes that you'll need to do just to create a letter form. So for this B, I actually start at the bottom here. I curve around and then I pull through. So you will find that there are some extra strokes that you may need to use for 1 or 2 letters, but the ones that I've listed above are the main ones that will be used consistently throughout the lowercase alphabet. So now if we go back in to do these thick lines, we started down here and then we went up, so that's thin, and then it went down here. So we want to thicken this part of the letter up, and then the rest stays thin because it's a cross. So if there's any strokes that are straight across, then I'll tend to keep those thin as well. Next we have our letter C, and this is just 1 stroke. So we're doing our oval, but we're not connecting, and we're pulling it through. So you can start to see how some of the strokes will be adapted to create specific letters, but there's still that similar movement. So calligraphy and faux calligraphy is all about building muscle memory, and once you've got the hang of all these shapes, you'll be able to do it much quicker. So we're adding our thick line in, so we're just going up and then down here. And we've got our letter C. That's nice and easy. It's just 1 stroke. Now we've got our D, and we already know this starts with our oval. So let's do our oval first. And if we look at this stroke, we can see that the thick line is on this side of the oval because that's where we went down. And now we're going to do our ascending stem loop. So we're going to start just above the oval part here. We're curving round and pulling through, and then for this last bit I'm actually going to curve it, and this just enables us to connect it to letters later on. So then we're just making this part of the letter thick. Next we have our letter E. So we're starting in a similar place to our oval, but we're curving all the way round and through like this. And then we're making a thick line here, similar to our oval as well. And then we have our letter F. Now the letter F is a little bit of a different letter. We do start off doing our ascending stem loop like this, but then we're going to come all the way down and pull through in this direction and then pull up. So this is all one stroke. And then we're just adding a thick line here where we went down. Now don't worry if you're not quite getting the hang of these strokes yet. You will find them in the Faux Calligraphy worksheet that you can download in the description below. Then we have our letter G. So that starts off with an oval shape, just like our letter D. So we've got our oval there, and we're just going to add a thick line on here. And then we are going to use this descending stem loop to create the stem of the G. So that's just pulling down here and then pulling through. And I'm just pulling through a little bit further, and that can help us connect to letters later on if we wish. So I've just added that thick line in where we're going down. And now we're moving on to our letter H, which is one of my favourite letters. So we're going to start off with our ascending stem loop. And we want this to look quite similar to our B, so it's going in a similar direction, and then the same thickness there. And then for the next part of the H, we're using this compound curve. So we're going up, over, and then up. And just like our A, we're not pulling it all the way to the top at this part of the stroke. And then we're just thickening it up in the middle here. Next we have our letter I. So that's just starting up here and pulling through and up. So we're doing this underturn stroke, but just like our A and our H, we're not pulling all the way to the top. We're adding in a thick line here, and then we have our dot. And I'm just making it the same thickness as this thick line here, rather than just dotting the page. And then we have our J, which is essentially this descending stem loop, but with the same dot that we've used for our I. So we're pulling through, and again, like your G, you can pull it out further if you wish. Just make sure with all of these strokes you're going at the same speed. We don't want to speed up or flick. It's all about going at a slow, controlled speed so you can create consistent letters. Then we're just going to thicken this line up here and do the dot. Next, on to our letter K, and this starts in the same way as our B and our H. So we're just doing this stem loop. And then we know that this goes thick here because we've already done it for a few other letters now. And then we're doing another unusual stroke, which is this shape here for our letter K. And I like to thicken this part, but although we go down here, I don't tend to thicken that part because otherwise it feels a little bit chunky. Next we have our letter L, which is very similar to our ascending stem loop, but we're going to curve around like we've done for our D. So let's just do the ascending, and then at this point we're curving around and pulling up, and that's created our letter L. And then we're just adding the thick line. Now in terms of where you add the thick line, whether you do it on the left or right of the existing line, it doesn't really matter as long as it's looking consistent with all the others. I decided to do it on the left of that line because I felt like this shape here didn't have enough space for me to add in a thick line on the right side. So it's all about judging which side would look better so your lettering doesn't look cramped. Okay, now we're on to our letter M, which is another one of my favourite letters. So this starts with a downward stroke. And then we have our overturn. So that is just turning over like this. And then we're going to use our compound curve. Now for this, I've actually done all the strokes before thickening. And this is generally what I do anyway when I'm creating words. And by creating all the strokes and then picking it up, it enables you to create a little bit more balance. So because we've got a lot of joining strokes here, I'd rather go in and make the lines thicker later on. So for this M, I'm going to go on the left side here. And then over here, I'm going to go thick there. And because I've added the thickness on the left side here, I'm also going to add it on this side, just so it makes these arches consistent with each other. Next we have our letter N, and we're just going to start in the same way as our M, but we're just going to miss out that overturn stroke and we're going straight into our compound curve. And again, we can go back and add in our thick strokes, like so. Now we're on to our letter O, and you could just do an oval shape, but I do my letter O's in a slightly different way, which just makes it feel a little bit more fancier. So I'm wrapping it around and pulling it through like that. And then the thick line is here because this is where I started, and it went down, around and through. Like I said already, the worksheet that you can download will massively help you, and you can trace over these letters just to get a feel of how they work. Next we're on to our P, and this starts as a downstroke, but we're extending it below this baseline our letters are sitting on. And then I'm just going to thicken up this stroke here. And then the next stroke is like our letter B, so this is where we're making our letters consistent with each other. So we're starting at the bottom line here where our letters are sitting on, we're going up, wrapping round, so this is thick, and then pulling through. Next we've got our letter Q, which starts off with an oval, so we're going in an anti-clockwise direction, remember, and then we're adding this thick line here. Then we're going to use the bottom half of this F to create our Q shape. And I like doing this because it means that we can still connect our Q to letters later on, and it adds a little bit of consistency through your letters. So we're just thickening it up here, and we've got our Q. Now for our R, we're going to do a slightly unusual shape, and we're going to start off going up and around like this. And then we're going to pull through in an underturn, but we're not pulling it all the way up like our A's. And then I'm just going to thicken that line. Now I'm not going to thicken this stroke here just because otherwise it looks a little bit odd. I know this R probably doesn't look like your normal handwriting, but this is how it will appear a lot in calligraphy. And as we're trying to recreate calligraphy in this fake style, we're going to do it in a similar way. By creating an R like this, it makes it a lot easier to connect to other letters later on. Next is our letter S. So this is a bit of a tricky shape. It doesn't really match any of our strokes, but that's okay. And I've just pulled it through so we can connect it to letters later on. And then I'm just thickening up this line where we went downward. So for our letter T, we don't do a curve on our ascending stem loop, we just loop it around like that. So this is just a straight downward stroke. And then we cross the T like so, and we're not going to thicken this stroke up, it's just going to stay in one weight. Next is the letter U, and the letter U is nice and easy to remember because it's just one underturn and then another underturn. But we're not pulling that second underturn all the way to the top, so it doesn't look like a W. So we've got our thick lines adding on here and here. Now we're going on to our letter V. So we're going down for this stroke, and we're just going to thicken that up. And then for my letter V, I like to pull it up and over like this, which just makes it feel a little bit more fancy. Then we've got our letter W, which is very similar to our letter U, we're just going to do an underturn here. And then we're going to do another underturn. But I'm going to pull this round like this. And this feels quite similar to our letter R. So we're still making our letters feel quite consistent with each other. I'm just thickening up this stroke here. And this stroke here. Then we've got our letter X. So this starts off up here and we're going to do this in one stroke there. And then we're going to pull through and up. So this is an upward stroke, so it stays thin, and then this is a downstroke, so it goes thick. I'm just going to pull that around. So we've got our thick line and our thin line. Next we have our letter Y, which is a nice easy one using some of the basic drills. So we're starting with our underturn and then going into our descending stem loop. So we've got our underturn and then our descending stem loop, and then we're going to add in our thick lines. And then the final letter, our letter Z. Again, like our letter R, we're doing a slightly fancier Z, which just helps with connecting it later on, and it's in a similar calligraphy style. So we're recreating that calligraphy in this faux calligraphy style. So that is how you can create the whole lowercase alphabet with just a few simple calligraphy strokes. There are obviously a couple of different ones that are being thrown in as well, but you can see how you can create a beautiful calligraphy style using these strokes and adding thick lines in, and all you need is a normal pen. You don't need any sort of fancy equipment. Okay, so now I've taken you through how to create the lowercase alphabet using these basic calligraphy strokes and where to add the thick lines. Let's look at a couple of study words that will help give you inspiration of where you can actually use this faux calligraphy, and also give you a guidance on how to create words using these letters. Now, as you've probably guessed already, this can take a little while to do, so I would not recommend using this for all of your study notes, as you may be there for a while. However, it is great for creating headlines for your study notes. So for example, if you were doing some biology revision, you could write biology at the top of the page. So I'm just using this as a guide. And remember, I'm lifting my pen off the paper after each stroke. And that's helping me create this calligraphy style. So we don't want to go too quickly either. And this is why we're not using it for all of our notes, and you're only using it for perhaps your headlines. So I'm just adding the dot, and then we're going to go in and add our thick lines. Now, using faux calligraphy and different coloured pens might help you stay organised with your study notes, and also doing a little bit of calligraphy between studying can actually be really good for your mental health. It's a really relaxing hobby, and it will take that strain off all of the studying that you're doing, and also if your notes look pretty, then you're more inclined to look at them again. Another area you could use faux calligraphy in terms of your revision is if you're doing a revision timetable, you could use it for the days of the week. So for example, if we were to do the word Monday, again, I'm just using the sheet here to remind me of how to create the letters. And you'll see that I'm going to add all the thick lines at the end of the word, and this just enables me to help keep everything a little bit more balanced. Now, I'm writing quite large at the moment. Part of that is to do with how thick the pen is that I'm using, and part of it is so you can clearly see what I'm doing. if you're using a thinner pen, you could write much smaller. So if you were using something like revision cards, for example, then you could write a lot smaller and you could fit more of the word in. Talking of revision cards, faux calligraphy can be a really great way of jazzing these up, especially if you want to do things like stick them on your wall, and it will help you remember them. And you can of course color code them depending on the subject or the type of answer. So for example, if I were to write oxygen, you might need that if you are doing some sort of science exam. So we've got our O, and then our Y, our G, E, and N. So you could use these as flashcards for a quiz. It might be a fun way to create a study game with your friends, and it will look super impressive if you've made it really pretty with some faux calligraphy. Just adding on these thick lines, and you can see how instantly this has made it a lot more interesting than if you just written this out in some scrawly handwriting. Calligraphy is just generally a really great mindful activity, and actually taking the time to do something a little bit creative during your studying can help you feel more productive. Although you may feel like you need to cram all your studying in one go, actually taking a break can be really helpful, and doing something like calligraphy can help you take your mind off things. It also gets you away from the screen. So you could actually use it away from your study notes, and you could just use it as a really fun practice to help you relax a little bit more. As I've mentioned, it is meant to be used sparingly, so please don't feel pressured that you have to write all of your notes in beautiful writing like this, but you could use it for buzzwords that you need to remember, or if you're really struggling to remember an answer, take the time to write it in calligraphy, because when it comes to this exam, you'll probably remember that moment that you were writing it in calligraphy, and you're actually building the muscle memory with your hand as well. So that might spark a bit of a memory when it comes to remembering information in your exams. I'm just going to take you through a few more words that you might find helpful. So for example, the word maths. So we're starting with our M, like Monday. We're curving over, pulling round, pulling up, and then we've got our H and through. And now we're just going to add in those thick lines. And of course, you don't always have to add in these thick lines. You could just use these calligraphy strokes to help you create neater handwriting. So if you struggle with reading your own writing sometimes, and there's some important words you need to remember, you could just use these simple strokes without adding thick lines to help improve your writing. So let's now do the word Wednesday. We've got a lot of different shapes in Wednesday, so that's a really great word for us to go through. So we have our W, so that's one underturn, and then remember for this one we're pulling through and round, and then we've got our E, and we've got our D. So if you do something like bullet journaling, then using faux calligraphy is another great way just to make it feel a bit prettier, and it doesn't require any fancy tools. So even if you've just got a pencil, you can totally give this a go and just make your study notes, your bullet journaling, or you could just have some nice, relaxing fun creating beautiful words. So you've got quite a long word there. Let's go back and add in our thick strokes. So again, I'm just using this page as reference. got our W, our N, our E, D. So just a little note for this stroke on the D, I've actually made it quite a lot thicker than the other strokes, and it will make it stand out a little bit too much. So we just want to try and make sure that the strokes are all a similar thickness. And let's do one more word. So let's do the word English. So we're just curving around and pulling through for our E, and then we're doing our N, we have our G, and that goes below the line our letters are sitting on, and then this one goes above. We've got our I, our S, our H, into that compound curve. And now we just go back in and thicken up the strokes. So you can see I'm alternating where I'm adding these thick and thin lines, just judging on the space that I have. So this is quite a big loop, so I'm going to add the thick line on the inside, and then I'll add it on the inside here. Now because this is quite a small loop, I'm going to add the thick line on that side, and then for the H I'm going to do a little mix of both. There is no right or wrong, we just want to try and make those strokes look consistent with each other. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of inspiration on how you could use faux calligraphy in your study notes, or whether you just use it as a really nice relaxing activity to give you a break from studying. Just remember, having a break is just as productive as studying, and this can be a really fun way to relax. Learning faux calligraphy is all about practice, practice, practice. That's why I've created this faux calligraphy worksheet for you, so you can easily download and print this off and practice the strokes and letters over and over again to help you create beautiful words. This worksheet's broken down into two sections. The first one covers the basic strokes that I went through with you towards the beginning of this workshop. So on all of these strokes, you'll see that there are arrows to remind you which direction to go in. And then on the second example, you'll see a grey line which represents where you're adding the thick stroke. You then have the strokes that you can trace over to give you a little bit of practice before trying it freehand. You'll notice that I've created a line system, so you're always sitting your letters on the bottom dotted line and they go up to the top. And then things like your letter G will go below and your letter D will go above. You'll see this in the second part of the worksheet, where you'll have the letter and an opportunity to trace over the letter, as well as some space to try it freehand. Now what I've done is alternated between the light grey and the black for when you are lifting your pen off the paper, and then the pink strokes are to represent where you're adding the thick lines. So hopefully this will help remind you to lift your pen off the paper after each stroke, so you're not just doing your handwriting. At the bottom of the worksheet, you'll see a little reminder to give us a tag if you do any faux calligraphy. I'd absolutely love to see what you create, whether it's for your study notes or just a mindful activity. If you don't have access to a printer at home, you could download this sheet as a reference, and then Silvine actually have this great little workbook, which is really similar to my worksheet. So you'll see that it's got these lines in here. So the dark black lines are the same as the dotted lines in my worksheet, and then the red lines are the top line and bottom line for your D's and your G's. Now these are a little bit smaller than my worksheet, but that will give you an opportunity to practice faux calligraphy at a smaller scale, especially if you're looking to use revision cards. And that's it for this faux calligraphy workshop. I hope you enjoyed learning how to create faux calligraphy and how you can use them to apply to your study notes to make them that little bit more beautiful. If you'd like to follow me and see what I'm getting up to in my business, then make sure you head over to Instagram and follow me, which is just @blinklettering. Myself and the team at Silvine would absolutely love to see how you've applied your faux calligraphy to your studying. So if you do share them on social media, then definitely give us a tag, which is just blinklettering and Silvine_UK. Don't forget your worksheet. So if you want to print this out as a little cheat sheet to help remind you how to do everything I've gone through in this video, then the link for it is in the description below. You can print this out at home as many times as you like. And there is a little reminder of tagging us if you did want to share your faux calligraphy. Thank you so much for watching this video, and a huge good luck with your studying and your exams. I wish you all the best, and I can't wait to see how you apply faux calligraphy to your study notes. Thank you for watching. Bye!